Good morning, everyone. My name is Martyn Taylor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Backroom, and today we've got an exciting topic for everyone. We're going to discuss our U.S. tax program. And with us today are the founder and CEO of the Backroom, Mr. Wayne Findlay, currently in New Zealand, and Mr. Marvin Galang. Marvin is a U.S. tax professional. He was the CEO and co-founder of Double Rule, one of the leading accounting and outsourcing firms in the US, and he's currently the Director of Operations for the US for the Backroom. So, gentlemen, if you don't mind, take a minute to say a little bit more about your background, and then we'll jump into the topic.
Oh, do you want me to go first, Marvin?
Sure.
I'll get the Marvin's mixed up. I'm Wayne Findlay. So, I'm an accountant here in New Zealand, come from an accounting background where we had our accounting firm with my brother and co-founder, Scott. We've got the Backroom, which we started 2018. So we've been going 5 years now. We're around 550 staff and across, multiple countries now. And the US is one of our countries that probably takes up 40% of our clients and personnel. So tax has been a common thing that's come up as to delivering a product for that, and it's something that we're focused on here. And I won't spoil the thunder, but it's something that we've been thinking about for a long time, and we're happy that we can deliver this product. So I'll pass you on to Marvin, who's involved in the business. He's a shareholder and he's got an interesting background. Marvin.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Martyn. Good morning, evening, or good afternoon. I don't know, what time you're gonna watch this, but tax is really. I'm a US CPA. Worked in the US for several years before really moving back to the Philippines, and it was tax that led me back to where it all started. So in 2007, moved back to the Philippines to do the first tax training of associates that we had back in those days. I was a member of a local CPA firm in LA, and really a lot of the reasons that we're going to talk about today was already evident for us at that time. So no other solution but to go back in the Philippines, train tax associates, and see how it all works. And we'll go over a lot of the reasons and a lot of how we did it back then, and maybe how it's different now as we move along in this recording.
Thank you, Marvin. Okay, so without further ado, let's dive into exactly what it is. I know that the heading for it is the U.S. tax program. However, I know it's a little bit different than the framework that the Backroom generally uses for its tax accountants. Wayne, can you go into that a little bit more about how the program is structured? And then we'll elaborate a little bit more on what some of the key benefits are.
Yeah. So the Backroom typically hires what we call FTEs, full-time equivalents, and we call it offshoring, where we have dedicated staff. And that's a model we've worked with at the Backroom, and the model I like, rather than on a job basis, which, maybe that's India, although it's done elsewhere, but predominantly in India, you'd get that type of outsourcing done, the pure sort of sense. So what we've done here is a bit more of a hybrid model where you have a dedicated resource for your tax, but not on a full-time basis. It's just over the tax season. So it's there for your peaks when you're busy, and so it's easy to turn that tap off once the tax season is finished. So that's my thinking on how we set this up.
So when you say that you have a resource for the tax season, would that mean that any of the tax accountants that are working for your company per se, would they be doing work for any other clients?
No, they would work for you, for your firm. Martyn's got a firm, you need one or two people. And then over that tax season, you would have those two people, or if it's one, they wouldn't work for anyone else.
Understood. Okay. All right. Thank you, Wayne. Marvin, you have several years of tax experience and have gone through the gauntlet of tax season for, I'm guessing, about 15 years. What are some of the benefits that you see to this program?
So as I've shared during the introduction, back in 2007, it was a two-member, two-partner firm, which was struggling or, in terms of growth. So we couldn't hire individuals, or if we hire individuals, basically you'll train them and they'll serve you during the busy season. And after the 3-month period, then they're gone. So it's a constant cycle of hiring, training, them resigning. It's never, you'll never have the velocity in terms of growth, right? So I think that situation is very much prevalent now compared to 15 years ago. We don't have a constant supply of trained professional in terms of tax, and I'm referring to the US. Lots of news happening. In fact, I was on a phone call this morning with another CPA firm who wants to hire tax professionals, complaining about, hey, they couldn't source them. So, and and obviously, if you don't have the supply just to serve you with your current needs, then there's also the problem of, hey, how do we grow from here? If I'm a one-person, two-partner CPA firm, how do we make this into a $1 million firm or a $2 million firm if there's only the two of us working during the busy season? So that led us to really source elsewhere. And back in the days, it was India that was really doing a lot of outsourcing as far as tax. But I'm a local from the Philippines, and so we came back here and started to do the tax training, tax program. Yeah.
I see. I understand. So Marvin, you touched on the training capacity and how a lot of the staff are trained and then they move on to other careers, which is possibly, or other agencies, which is something we could talk about further at another time. But as it pertains to training, and we're talking about the US tax associates that we are offering to clients, can either of you go into a little bit more of the agenda? What is the, who are the candidates that we are training? What's the methodology that we're training them in? Who's reviewing them? Who's their moderator? Would either of you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, let me start with that. Let me start because if we look at the situation in the US during the busy season, most firms, if not like at least in our experience, what we did if we couldn't find resource locally was to really go through the more popular supplier of people like the Robert Half or Apple One, temporary support, and then they charge you $30, $40, $50 an hour type of thing, right? But you'd still invest the time, providing the associates proper training. So really what it is, hey, why don't I standardize this training? And then using technology, go elsewhere, which in our case was the Philippines, and hire, the people that has the basic knowledge in terms of what I want them to do. If I go back in 2003, when I first got involved in outsourcing, the basic knowledge that we were teaching was really Excel. And at that time, believe it or not, Adobe Acrobat. And it is because we needed to grab data from Adobe and then populate an Excel spreadsheet. And then from Excel, we can upload them to a tax software program, right? So, and then of course, you need to train them with the basic of, hey, what is US tax? What is that? And all. So, come up with a standard program, go to another country, train the accountants or local accountants with the US knowledge in terms of how this whole thing works and see if it works. And it did. It did in 2007 and it lasted for 4 years. until eventually it got rolled into another company. So, and I think a lot of the similarities of that program before, and maybe Wayne can share with us how it's done in the back room. We can still see a lot of the remnants of what we have done before with what we're doing now.
Thanks, Marvin. Yeah, and Wayne, if you could touch on that and also delve into a little bit more of the training agenda. How long is it? What are the topics that they're studying? What are they prepared to do upon their successful graduation from the program?
Yeah, well, training, I suppose, is what differentiates backroom from other sort of, offshore and, providers. We invest heavily in training. We've got a large training team. And so when we built this product, it was relatively easy, especially with Marvin and his team and his affiliation with his firm, Double Rule, to come up with the material that we need to, build some case studies, have some real live cases on how it works, do the theory first, then do the case studies, and then do practical sort of application of it all. I'm not a US tax accountant. I don't know. I know enough to be dangerous, which was probably when I was doing New Zealand tax was enough. But I know that the training that we're doing is 2 to 3 months of training. I think it's actually more like 3 months of training. They have to pass an exam to graduate. And also we have the help of some sort of more senior people, which we would call our reviewers, that are overseeing everything as well. But Marvin, maybe you could explain a bit more about the tax types and software that we're using.
Yeah, good point, Wayne. So Wayne touched on the process, which is really, we give them theoretical training, intro to basic US income tax, basic corporate tax, even US businesses in general. So when we hire these associates, they're probably familiar with how Philippine businesses work, how they're set up and all that. But, we have to share with them how how it is done in the US and what's the impact of the type of business setup a company has with the type of taxes that they're going to pay. Who pays the tax? Is it the company or the individual? Those types of things. Then we go with the case studies, which, hey, these are actual experiences that we've had over the years, individual and corporate. Of course, we had to massage them and make sure that we don't violate any data privacy rules. And then from there, we go with the practical application. So they really start preparing tax returns using tax software. Softwares we utilize right now are softwares like Pro Connect from Intuit, Pro Series from Intuit, Lacert, UltraTax from Thomson Reuters, CCH Access. So these are the types of applications that we have experience in at the moment.
I see. And as far as any of the different types of tax forms that are completed, I am also not like Wayne. I'm not a U.S. tax person. I'm not a tax person at all. But obviously, I complete my taxes every single year, and I have to deal with 1040s, 1099s. Do you do things that involve, let's say, trusts and sale of assets, dividends, joint venture earnings, things of that sort?
Yes, so the basic 1040 to complicated 1040. So these are individual. When we talk about 1040, these are individual returns. And, so from the most basic ones to much more complicated ones, we're able to prepare. Then you have the corporate returns, 1120, 1120S. Then you have partnership returns, 1065s. We don't do much of trust returns at the moment, something that can be taught and trained eventually, depending on how the firms would look into it. But really suggesting that you immerse the tax associates with the with the basic ones, so they can immediately feel the benefit and advantage of having those offshore resources that can immediately have an impact on their process and and in the firm in general.
Understood. Wayne, I think it was you that touched on. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add. One thing that's important is having that employee, and I think it'd be important to have them for the next tax season as well, because they get used to your software and the way you do things. So what my plan is that they would be there for your firm for the next tax season as well. So even though they're not 100% of the time, but for that tax season. So Mary works for Marvin for double roll, and then Marvin would have first, we call it dibs in New Zealand, first pick of Mary again to work
the same.
for his accounting firm again to do the taxes. So that's the plan, that you can have that dedicated resource, but just over the season.
Sure, and that makes sense, right? There's a lot of synergies, and as far as the familiarity with the software system, and also probably with security protocols too, which brings me to another question, right? I was going to ask, what are some of the potential risks in dealing with offshored, outsourced employees out of the country? I'm sure there are concerns about security. How are those addressed? Is it an issue? How is that mitigated?
I might talk to our security first, and then Marvin will know more about how you set up like a VPN and to work directly with CCH, etc. But we've just gone through an ISO 27001 process. So we've passed our audit. So we've invested heavily in security. We have measures, that we follow that track, employees and, what they're actually working on. So we can see if they've been productive or unproductive, if they've been doing stuff they shouldn't be done. We run penetration tests. We have to have the latest virus and any malware software. So we have a lot of measures in place from a security standpoint. And then it's just a matter of making sure where that data sits from a privacy point of view. I know that's important with the US. So that's normally done through VPNs. But Marvin, you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, so Wayne touched on a lot of the points there. Really, it's a combination of process and technology when it comes to security. And even in the process, we start off with the recruitment. So we have to hire the right people, provide the background checks on the character of these individuals, ensure that we're only dealing with the appropriate individual. Also, as far as process, the training involved is very important when it comes to privacy, confidentiality. And so we have to make sure that they are not just trained, but regularly reminded of, hey, this is how data should be handled properly, appropriately, privately, and how to treat them. In terms of, Wayne touched on the tech side as far as software for monitoring, also as far as the data where it sits. Again, because this is the firm's data, it's the firm's prerogative, what system to use, where the technology that will be utilized. A lot of what we've seen are not necessarily, other than the VPNs, are virtualized solutions. Like the servers are sitting somewhere in North America. The desktop shows up even in a thin client desktop that doesn't really have anything other than a virtualized software like Citrix or VMware. So they're really accessing a computer that is sitting in the US versus, say, the data's sitting in offshore.
Right, understood. I can't remember which of the two of you it was that mentioned it, but there was some discussion about a review process. So what I was gathering from that is we have our trained tax professionals that are working on the returns, and then there is a further level of review. Is that right, before it reaches the client?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So I think it's important to have that senior person here in the Philippines working with their associates, and they're there to bounce questions off, to review the tax. But we got to put a disclaimer in there that it's not, I wouldn't call it a final review. It's still the ultimate responsibility for each firm to sign off on that tax return before it's filed. We wouldn't, what would you call it, Marvin? We're not putting ourselves out there to sign off on that tax return, because people do it differently, and they need to be responsible for that filing themselves.
Exactly. So this is the differentiator of what the backroom's offering now versus how a lot of the firms are doing it currently, or even in outsourcing, to India. So basically, how it's done now with a lot of firms is, hey, they hire someone, dedicated person for them. They provide them the training, and then they sit in the bottom section of the processing line, which is really data entry. And then they rely on the US resource, their managers sitting in the US to review, finalize the return, talk to the clients, and all that stuff, right? And so they pay this individual whatever the contract is with some of the providers, including the back room, to some of the clients that we have. Similar situation happens in India, and sometimes the rates are and the contract vary. We've seen contracts where, okay, I'll pay you on a per return basis, not really a full-time staff, but I'll pay you on a return. So per return, this is the fee. But still, the process is the same. A tax manager sitting in the US, hired by the firm, really doing the review. What we have done is something different, where we've put in a layer of quality assurance with a local tax manager, a Philippine tax manager, that will do the cursory review, as look at the return, look at some of the basics that needs to be there, and really, ensure quality before it goes to the US person. Just like what Wayne said, we are not absorbing the risk of the return by having this tax manager reviewer in a way. What we are saying is we are ensuring quality of the process, the data entry, completeness of the return to a certain point. And if not, then, hey, post basic questions again to the US tax manager, so that instead of the US tax manager spending another 30-40% on the return, maybe it can be lowered, to 5%, allowing them to process more returns and spend their time mostly on now communicating with the client versus spending a lot of time ensuring, hey, everything was done complete and all that. So that's really what the main difference is.
I understand. So I'm thinking that a lot of companies that decide to try this service are going to be wondering who is exactly their point of contact. Marvin, you mentioned a little bit that the tax advisor in the Philippines may be talking to a tax advisor with the firm, say, based in the US. However, is there also an account management layer or any other means of communication? Who's in charge of the onboarding process, for example? Wayne, is that something you could respond to?
Yeah, we're familiar with the account management. We have that now with our existing clients and our team. And that's a layer we'll have in this process as well. So each firm will have a dedicated account manager that will help with the onboarding, communicating with IT to get get everything set up from a tech point of view. And then from a workflow production, just help managing the throughput of the tax returns, so that they're getting done, in the right order and on a timely basis.
I understand. I'm not sure if there are any more issues to discuss, but I'm sure what's on everyone's mind is pricing. Marvin touched on the difference in how and when you mentioned a hybrid model where we're not doing it on a per return basis per se. So can you touch on what the pricing structure is and perhaps what are some of the benefits by pricing it that way versus on a return basis?
Yeah. So how we're priced it is on an hourly rate. So for the tax associates, it's $25 US per hour. And that includes the associate, no, not the associate, the reviewer. So that's all inclusive in that pricing. But what we want is a commitment for that tax season. So we have a minimum period of 2 months that you hire them. We just don't want to have someone come in, hire someone for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then take off. We want a commitment for 2 months. And also the hours that they're doing here in the Philippines over that busy time is 50 hours. So, your productive hours will be quite high. On top of that, we have a setup fee of $500. That's to get things up and running, the IT or the tech costs, recruitment, and to recoup some of that cost from that training as well. So there's been a lot invested in there.
I see. When you mentioned productivity, and I think that's maybe one of the differentiating issues between on a per return basis versus the hourly basis. How are you making sure that when people are billing hourly that they're being productive?
Yeah, well, so effectively, they'll be doing timesheets for us, so we can monitor how many hours they're doing for each, for the firm. But also, they should be doing timesheets for the firm that they're working with. So then you can see on a per job basis how long that's taken to do that tax return. We'll see it on a per client basis. So they'll be doing dual timesheets, which will help with their billing and should measure up with what is being charged to the client.
Is there any sort of productivity software that's also being used? And I would assume that that's also part of what the tax reviewer is measuring as well, right? While supervising their associates.
Yeah, we'll be able to track, like a real high number or for productivity. And we've also got our, what would you call it, our security software that manages productivity as well. And that works on PC uptime. So there's actually going to be 3 different sort of productivity measures that we can look at to make sure things are working well, and the staff are working effectively as well.
All right, thanks for that, Wayne. So we've covered quite a bit already, and I think based on a lot of the responses, we're going to have a lot of interested parties out there. What are the next steps? How does someone begin to engage with the backroom on this program?
Well, I might take that one, Marvin, but I think with the technology here of this podcast, if you're watching the video, we'll have an email flash up, which will be sales@thebackroomop.com. Send an email there. Also, we'll be putting our individual emails up if you want to contact us direct. We've trained the staff. I think they're ready to go 7th of February, I think, is when the batch finishes. So they're sitting there ready to go. So onboarding wise, we've done most of it. It's just really lining them up with your tax software and your processes. So the earlier we get to do that, the better. So I wouldn't muck around. And also we have a limited supply of staff, and they'll be allocated on a first in, first served basis. So all I'd say is act now, and let us take care of your tax issue.
as this is an inaugural program for the back room, I also had heard some whispers that there may be some special pricing for those companies that are willing to act soon. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I got my arm twisted, I suppose, and because it is new, so for this first batch, if we would call that, yeah, we're doing a 2-for-1 deal. So that means you get 2 employees for one. So at $25, that will work out at $12.50. So it's something that I think would be really cost effective for tax professionals in the US.
Yes, that's a significant discount for sure. Okay, so again, at the conclusion of this, you're going to be seeing an email flash on board for the sales department. That's sales@thebackroomop.com. You'll have the contact information for the 3 of us that are participating here. Marvin, last to speak, any final thoughts?
Just do it. No, I think a couple of things. Number one, don't take our word for it. Try it. Just like anything else, say this may work for you, may not work for you, but when we did it back in 2007, there's really no turning back. We've invested the time in training and we've seen the benefit come out right off the bat. With people responding, the people that we trained that were working on our returns were same quality, if not unfortunately better quality than some of the people that we've hired onshore, and they were really good in what they're doing. And then second is the commitment. If the reason why we did a 2-month commitment is because when you're in, you're in. It cannot be, hey, I'll try it for 1 week, 2 weeks, and then it's not working, I'm going to find another solution. It takes time to really gel with the team, with the person, get to know them, treat them as your staff, and you're gonna get the benefits of by doing it that way.
Wonderful, gentlemen. Well, again, thank you very much for your time. I hope everybody who's been watching this or listening to this has found it to be very informative. And as we said, there's a 2-for-1 discount that breaks down to $12.50 an hour. So we highly encourage you to sign up for this before we run out, because I know that first batch, which is finishing in early February, is in short supply. So thank you again, folks.